Hi and welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Today we're doing something that I think is very handy for many use cases. Imagine you'd like to have a standard UIKit app like our Breakfast Company app here, and you'd like to include some animations that are not that easy to create with the things that are available in UIKit. Well, lucky for you, there are great frameworks that are provided by Apple, especially the gaming frameworks that can do a lot of animation stuff for you. So when we click on the Auto Breakfast button, we have a nice little bee coming around here and flying through the screen. This is only a demo application, of course, but imagine you'd like to show another interesting animation or use something like a particle emitter or anything that is available in SpriteKit. So this is what we are going to create today, but before we get started with using SpriteKit together with UIKit, I have some announcements to make. The first announcement is about the Swift Tutorial Conference Bundle, which normally costs $99, and since we're in Halloween time at the moment, we're giving it away at a special Halloween price of just $29. This is what the conference bundle looks like. You can start exploring right away. You have all the great sessions that took place at Swift Tutorial Conference 2016 about iOS best practices in design, about getting started with Swift and Xcode, about the new speech recognition API, SpriteKit for Apple Watch, a lot of SiriKit stuff, and many other interesting things, and you can get it this week only for $29. Just follow the link in the video description below for that. The second announcement is about my cooperation with Numa TV. We're currently creating something really incredible. It has never been done before, and I'm really excited about it. I'm going to tell you a lot more about that next week, so make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel so that you definitely get to know what this is all about. And now, without further ado, let's start coding this great integration of SpriteKit with UIKit. So let's bring up Xcode and let's create a new single view application right here. So although we're using SpriteKit, we do not have to select a game template. So let's use the single view application, click next, and let's call it SpriteKit UIKit, or you can give it a more creative name than that. And I'm creating that on my desktop. And before we get started, what we should do is definitely add the SpriteKit framework to our project. When you create a game, this is done by default, but now we have to do it manually. So let's add that SpriteKit framework right here. And we have two things here that we need to import. First of all, we have our food image for the Breakfast Company, which I'm going to put into my assets folder. So let me just drag and drop that right here. I only have a 2x version. So obviously when you deploy that application, you also need to support a 3x version for the plus versions of the iPhone. What we are also going to need for this animation is a so-called Sprite Atlas. And in this atlas, you will find all of the images of our bee in the different states of that animation, and you can create pretty cool animations with that. And to make a Sprite Atlas, all you need to do is create a folder and add the .atlas extension. And with that, Xcode can actually detect that this is a SpriteKit Atlas, so I'm dragging that to my project as well. Make sure to select copy items if needed and create folder references. So I now click finish, and with that I have also added my bee atlas. And then we can create the user interface. So all I need to do is actually making my Xcode screen a little bigger. And we're going to start with standard UIKit components. So no SpriteKit components here, actually. We're starting, let's say, with a label. Let's put that to the left. Let's add the Breakfast Company. And let's create a second line for that. So in the attributes inspector, we select 2 lines, and then to create a second line, I press option on my keyboard in the text area here and hit the return key, and with that I have a second line, and I can create a little bigger label right here. Let's increase the size a little, choose maybe a bold font size right here, and place it somewhere in the top left corner. We must make sure that the auto resizing classes are properly set and the top right corner is perfect with the settings we already have. So let's continue with the UI image view that we also need at the bottom. So I'm dragging this up a little, somewhere around this. I'm selecting my food background here, make sure that it's set to aspect fit or aspect fill, and then we also set the auto resizing masks here, and we don't want to pin it to the top and left, but instead to the left, to the bottom, and to the right. And we also want to make sure that it stretches horizontally, so we also select the horizontal arrow here in the center for the auto resizing masks. We could also make this a little bigger maybe, and all we need now is a button. And let's call that Order Breakfast. All right, and to make this a little cooler, let's choose another color here. I'm using the color picker and simply pick a color here from one of these raspberries. That's a little dark, maybe something a little brighter, and that's already a lot better. So let's increase the size here again, maybe also choose another style here, maybe semi-bold or just medium, and increase the size of our button. And again, we center it somewhere here, and we also make sure to select only the bottom center pin here in the auto resizing masks section. And with that, our application is actually ready when we're talking about the user interface. But what we'd like to do now is also add a SpriteKit scene. How can we do that? First of all, we add UI view, another UI view to our storyboard here. Let's put it to the top left corner and make it about that size. And we will then pin it to the top and to the right and to the left and make it stretch horizontally. And what we also need to do is positioning it maybe a little below our heading here on the below the breakfast company. So I'm moving that up to the top. And if you have never worked with SpriteKit before, there are some cool videos to create games with SpriteKit on this channel, but just as a brief summary, SpriteKit consists of SpriteKit scenes and sprites, and the sprites live inside a scene and aren't visible outside of that scene. That's actually all you need to know for this tutorial to know about SpriteKit scenes and sprites. And if you'd like to know more, just have a look at those gaming videos on my channel. You'll get the hang of SpriteKit really easily and also really quickly. So what we want to do now, first of all, is this view is going to be not an ordinary UI view, but a SpriteKit view. So what we want to do here is give it a custom class, which is going to be an SK view, SK for SpriteKit. And then we are going to create an outlet for this view, and we're going to call that scene view. And we connect that to our view controller in the assistant editor. And for that to work, what we also need to do is import SpriteKit. And let's just build that really quickly. And I think it just failed because I did not select a development team. But since we do not need a physical device here, I'm actually charging my iPhone at the moment. I'm simply switching to a iPhone 7 simulator. Let's build that again. And the build succeeded. And with that done, we can now create our scene. And this is going to be a bee scene for our flying bee. So let's turn off the assistant editor, select our view controller.swift file, press Command N on the keyboard, and let's create a new Cocoa Touch class. And this is going to be a class called bee scene. and is a subclass of SK Scene. So let's hit next and create that class. And we still need to import SpriteKit here for that to work. Let's build that again, and we're good to go. And what we actually need for our animation to work is an array of textures. And this is going to be the frames of our B animation. So let's call that variable B frames. And I'm going to make this of type SK texture. And this is an array of SK textures. This is going to be optional. And this is actually also the only property that we're going to need in that class, so really simple. We're also going to need a custom initializer, and always when you need a custom initializer, you're also required, so we're using the required keyword, to use the initWithCoder function, or initWithCoder initializer. So let's call super initWithCoder and pass along the decoder. And now we're ready to go and create our own initializer. And this is going to be a simple init function, but what we are going to need here is a size. So we're overriding that init with size initializer. And first of all, we call super init and pass along the size. And then the first thing we should do is set the background color. So we use self background color and set that to UI color white. This is just important to fit with the background of our storyboard. Of course, you could also fill the complete screen with bees, or depending on your situation, this might not be white, and you also might not have only a portion of the screen available for your SpriteKit scene. And what we then need to do is, again, create some placeholder for our textures to initialize. So we again create a frames array here, which is going to be an array of SK textures, and we're simply initializing that with an empty array for starters. And then we need our B atlas, and we can get that with SK texture atlas named, and it's named B. So this has to be the same name as your folder has without the .atlas extension. So with that done, what we need to do is actually initialize our frames array and add all of the images that we have added to our B atlas to our frames, or to our SK texture array. And we can use a simple for loop for that. The images are named B1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're iterating from 1 to 6 in our for loop. And first of all, we need a texture name. This is going to be simply a string B, use string interpolation here, with the index as the, let's have a look. As you can see, with B underscore and the number of our image. So we're simply using the index here to call the right texture. And then what we need to do is create another texture object and use our B atlas texture named, and then the texture name. And with that, we're actually done creating our texture, but we still need to append it to our frames array. So let's append our texture right here. And then what we also need to do is use self and B frames and assign our frames array to that global property. And with that, we're actually completely done with our initializer. And now we can completely focus on our flight maneuver of our B. So we're creating a specific function for that, and we're going to need some space for that. So let me make some space here, create a new function. Let's call it flyB. And the first thing we need to do is actually having a start sprite, or something that we can display before the animation starts. Therefore, we're getting a texture, and we can simply use our B frames and select the first object there, which is 0. Since this is optional, we can force unwrap it, or we could check if we have a B frames available. And we now have the first image actually from our texture from our texture array, and then we have to create a so-called sprite node, which we can, or a sprite that we can place in our SpriteKit scene. So we call that B, and we use SK sprite node to initialize that, and we simply initialize that with the texture, and this is the texture that we have just created. Then we can give our B a size. I have chosen about 150 by 150 pixels, depending on your situation. Again, this could change. And then we need a random position now in our case. And the cool thing about SpriteKit and also other gaming technologies from Apple is that they have pretty interesting functions available for you. And one of them is the random distribution function, which is part of the gameplay kit. So I'm also importing another game technology here, which is the gameplay kit. And with the gameplay kit, we can get a random number between a lowest value and a highest value, which is pretty useful if you want to distribute objects randomly. So let's create an object called random by position generator. And we can now use gameplay kit and random distribution. And we simply initialize that with the lowest value and the highest value. And we're starting about 50 pixels from the bottom, and the highest value is going to be self.frame.size.height of our scene. And since this is going to need an integer, we're simply fix that and replace our CG float with a casted integer. And now to actually get the Y position, what we need to do is use our random by position generator and call the next int function. Since a position, as also sometimes in UIKit, a position in SpriteKit needs to be a CG float, we also have to cast that to a CG float. So let's put CG float and some parentheses around our function call right here. So with that, we have a Y position, but what we still need is actually an X position. And as you've seen, the bees could fly from left to right and from the right to the left. So let's create a Boolean value for that. Let's call it right to left. The standard direction of our bee is from left to right. That's the orientation that it has by standard or by default, and we can reverse that direction. But how can we randomly decide if we wanted to fly from the left to the right or from the right to the left? There is another interesting randomization function that we can use for that, which is arg4random, which does nothing else but create a random number, which also could be very huge. And what we can do is we can use modulo 2, so we check with that if this number is divisible by 2. If it is divisible by 2 and we compare it to 0, then we get true. And if it's not divisible by 0, we get something that is not equal to 0, so we have false. And by that we can randomly decide if we want to fly from the left to the right or from the right to the left. And depending on that, we create our X standard or our initial X position, which we use the right to left bool. And if it is right to left, then we set the initial X value to self.frame.size.width, and we add half of our B size, so B and size and width divided by 2. And if right to left is false, we use our negative B's size width and also divide that by 2. And then we set the B's initial position by simply using the B and its position property, and we create a CG point for that with an X and a Y value. So we have X position and we have Y position for that already prepared. And then what we also need to do is to make sure that our B faces in the correct direction. So we check if right to left is true. What we want to do is using our B, change the X scale property and set this to -1. So we simply turn it around. And then we can add our B to our scene. So we simply call self and add child. And with that, we can add a new node to our scene. And this is going to be our B. But at the moment, our B does nothing else but look good. So we have initialized it with the first image, but we don't get the animation yet. So we have to add our B animation. And to do that, we run a simple SpriteKit action. And we take our B again, and we call the run function. And as you can see, we can run an SK action right here. And the action that we want to provide is repeated forever, so we call repeat forever. And again, we have to provide it with an SK action, and this is going to be the animation that we want to do. So we use SK action and animate, and this time we want it to animate with a texture, with many textures actually, and a time per frame. And also we want to set the resize and restore keys here. So let's choose this function right here. We can provide it with self and the B frames. Let's force unwrap that right here. The time per frame is going to be 0.05. We don't want to resize it, but we want to restore it. So with that done, we have created our animation for our B, and we now simply have to apply another animation for our movement across the screen. So let's create a variable that determines the range that we need to cover. So range to cover is going to be self frame size width, so the width of our screen, and we add the B's size and width. So that's the total distance that we need to cover, or let's also call this distance to cover. And what we also need to make sure is that when we actually fly from the right to the left, that we that we also turn around the distance. So we use the distance to cover and multiply it with -1 to change the direction of our flight animation. And we also need a time for our animation. So how long should that animation take? And to calculate the time, we simply divide the displacement by the velocity that we intend our B to fly with. So let's create a time constant right here, and we take the distance to cover, and let's say we divide it by 150. This is going to be our velocity, and maybe that's a little high. Let's use 140. And the problem now is that distance to cover could sometimes be a negative value, but a time can never be negative. So what we need to do is use the absolute value. So we use the abs function right here, and then we can also cast it to a time interval. So many parentheses for a small calculation here, but we definitely need it. And then we can create a new SK action for the movement. So let's use call that move action. Use SK action. We move it by an X and a Y position with a certain duration that we have calculated, and we want to use the distance to cover for the X value. We do not want to move it in a Y direction, and we have the time that we've just calculated as a duration for our animation. And the last action that we need to create is the remove action, where we remove our sprite from the scene so that it does not consume memory. And we use SK action again. We run now a code block, and first of all we want our B and remove all the actions that are associated with that B, and we also want to remove that B from its parent. And then we can actually apply all of those actions, and let's call that all actions and SK action, and we can now use a so-called action sequence. And there we can pass along an array of all of the actions that we created, which is the move action and the remove action. And with that, we're actually almost done. All that's left is use our B and run a certain action, which is the all actions array. And now let's build our application. and the build succeeded, and we're actually completely done with our flyB function. We have initialized our B scene. So let's now go back to our view controller and add all the missing code, which isn't much actually. All we need to do is create a scene here, which is a property that we have available in our complete class. So this is going to be our B scene, define that as optional. And then in the viewDidAppear function, viewDidAppear, we call super viewDidAppear, pass along the animated argument. And what we want to do here is use our self.scene and initialize our B scene with a size. So let's create a CG size right here with a width and height. So we use self.sceneView and frame and size and width. And for the height, we use self.sceneView.frame.size.height. And with that, you can actually completely customize which area of your screen should be covered with a SpriteKit scene. So you have tons of use cases for that, and this is pretty amazing. And all we need to do now is use self and scene view and present our scene, self.scene or just scene. We could also just use scene here. And all that's left to do now here is actually activating our fly animation, and for that we have a button. With that button we could actually order breakfast, but we also want to fly our bee. Let me choose the automatic version of function here in the jump bar. Let's press Control on the keyboard and drag somewhere here under viewDidAppear. Let's choose action as a connection, and I'm going to call that order breakfast and show bee. And I actually wrote breakfast, but it doesn't matter. So let's just order breakfast and show B here. And now in our view controller function, we need to check if our scene actually exists. Otherwise, our app could crash here. So let's check if that with an if-let statement, if the scene can be assigned to that constant self scene. So if self.scene can be assigned to that constant we just created, we want to use that scene and fly our bee. And now it's time to test that on our simulator. So let's have a look if that works. This is still the demo version. And here's our new version, which looks a little different. We used some different fonts, and we order breakfast, and there is our bee flying from the right to the left, and another one, and another one. We have this nice animation, and I think this is pretty cool. So I hope you enjoyed this connection between SpriteKit and UIKit. Let me know if you'd like to see more use cases of that and with different SpriteKit components. Don't forget to get the Swift Tutorial Conference Bundle for the reduced price during the Halloween time. And I thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.